Steal a pen. Sorry. Your very own. Thank you. You're welcome. I'll do the check. Oh, thank you.
This is awesome.
Road trip.
That's great.
You're so sweet. Oh.
So you're.
I don't think so, but I certainly hope that.
Hey. Well, no, it's we got it. See how it's written on the paper. Frank is weighing in.
So I just did this art installation
Oh, it was, but I initially when I tried to join, so I joined the meeting on my other still running, so that's why.
we have this really relationship where so I got that frame, but I have not talked. I don't know where you can
Well, how do you feel about stuff now?
What's going on?
Yeah, we're presenting.
There's several things. I looked at my own cable because there's no HDMI. Now they've been doing a lot of stuff. There's cables and plates. Luckily, this definitely HDMI.
Serious.
Oh, I forgot. My God.
I'm letting them try to.
That kind of advice.
Yeah, it's kind of fun just to watch back and forth now.
They get started.
I don't know.
I was working for an alternative.
Yeah.
She was the underground that wanted
Yeah.
I almost were.
Oh, yeah.
He did. I saw him.
I really did. That's just the way.
And genetics and ways. It's like The biodiversity.
Oh, and honey.
Oh, that's fine.
That's why you're looking at shit. That was a. And where is this? Cheaper. Oh, okay.
Like super.
I would, that's a guy that took me.
So y'all ready to get started? Okay. So thanks for joining today. This is the first meeting without Marissa here to run it, so forgive me if I'm a little clunky running the meeting, and this will probably be my last time running the meeting. Angela Grong is Marissa, our new Great Salt Lake Sovereign Rights Manager. So from now on, she'll be doing all the coordination on this. And I'm just gonna limp this along right now and make sure that I don't put Angela on the spot today. So hoping to pass the baton to her though. So in the future, she'll be working through tech team grants and making sure things run smoothly that way. So I think we normally start with some introductions. So if you want to go around the room and introduce yourself, that'd be great.
I was trying to work my way around with most of you. But I'm just brand new to this role and really excited to be here. So
Awesome. Ben Starman and Deputy Director of Forestry.
Bill Johnson, University of Utah.
Connie Baxter, Great Salt Lake Institute of Clemson University. Welcome.
Wayne Planning Stockton University and then college and tech.
Over in Utah Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining.
Around, it's cooperative.
Linda Freitas, Friends of Great Salt Lake.
Leland Lobby, Division of Water Resources.
Craig Miller, Division of Water Resources.
Jack Ray with the Utah Water Quality Association.
Jim Harris, Division of Water Quality.
Emily Holly, Forestry, Fire, State Lands. Allison Smith, Forestry, Fire, and State Lands.
First, then if we can go to the back.
Yeah, Chris Haramoto, Utah State Parks. Hunter Simon, Division of Wildlife Resources, Great Salt Lake Ecosystem Program.
Georgie Corkery, Great Salt Lake Institute, Westminster.
Sam Carter, grad student, University of Utah.
And then at the complement, grad students, University of Utah.
Dr. Downer, Supply Geological Survey.
Perfect. And then, do you mind opening the list of attendees online? I won't put everybody on the spot to online, but I'm just going to go through the attendees. So we have Andrew Rebke, Christine Rumsey, Claire Spingenberg, Craig Miller, David O'Leary, Elliot Jagniecki, Emily Clark, Emily Hamill, Janice Gardner, Kyle Stone, Lauren Head, Deanna Littler-Wolf, Michael Conover, Rob Dubuque, Sharon Montesino, Sam Dutta, Tom Marston, Jing. I apologize, I won't try to pronounce your last name, Jing. But it is great to have everybody today. If I missed anybody, feel free to pipe up and you can introduce yourself as you come in. So to hop the agenda real quick, I don't have much on as far as advisory council updates. The advisory council is having some subcommittees that are looking at some potential funding opportunities for a couple of different projects that were suggested at the last advisory council meeting. So I'll look forward to working with Angela to report on those at our next tech team and what was decided upon there. As far as the salinity committee update goes, we have not had a salinity committee update in a little bit of time, or excuse me, a salinity committee meeting in some time, mainly because there hasn't been a major desire to modify the berm at the current time. The salinity is in a good spot, and the berm has eroded and it's been flowing northward, and things are really starting to equalize. So things are in good shape that way, but we did do a procurement on the berm to look at an engineering analysis of what options may exist to do something maybe a little more effective than a pile of rock, something we can move up and down with more ease, something that's a little more dependable that can't erode. It's easy, so we can be more intentional with releases. So obviously in such a harsh environment, that's going to be a challenge to have something that, corrosive, a lot of wave action. And Jeff Denblicker, who just walked in, is our contractor on that and with Jacobs Engineering. So we're really confident that Jeff and his team are going to be able to come up with something meaningful on that. So Jeff, I will probably botch these dates, but I think Jeff is working on our options right now. He's working with Craig, Leela, USGS, others to collect information. And we'll likely at our next salinity committee start talking through some of those options so the salinity committee can provide some direction. And then if I'm remembering correctly, Jeff, is it February 15th that we're going to try to finish up by? And the purpose of that is that if we have the opportunity and the legislature desires, they could, potentially put some funding towards this. If it seems like it would be a good investment of the state's money. So we're really hoping things all come together, but I know Jeff and his team are working hard to make that happen. Jack.
Yeah, so the report I got in a meeting recently is that soil moisture is pretty poor this year. And we have an anemic start to the water year. Is there a plan in place to restore that pile of rocks?
Yeah, so that we don't have necessarily a plan in place right now to say, if this happens, here's what we're going to do. But when we convene in January, we'll look at the conditions, and especially as we get closer, we'll start understanding a little bit more about what the winter has brought to us. And I was really excited in November when we were getting all that rain at the end of the month, but it really seems like things have petered out. And so if it seems like we're going to have a poor winter and conditions persist that way, we would absolutely be looking towards raising that berm. And if necessary, we'd be doing the modeling to understand the salt balance, what would be needed to do that. But as of today, we're around 120 grams per liter, which is honestly where we aim to be in the fall. We want to be between 120 to 150 in the fall. So as far as salinity goes, we're in a really good spot. But with that said, we're also potentially at the start of another drought period. I mean, nobody knows for sure, but that's kind of what history says. So I think we want to be a little more on the conservative side, at least in my opinion, on what we do to manage salinity. So we'll be with the committee, we'd be looking at all of those factors and trying to decide if it's appropriate to raise that and capture the spring runoff.
So is salinity the only factor, or do you also look at keeping the water level sufficient to cover the microbialites?
That's a great question, Jack. The salinity committee only looks at salinity, but those other things are massively important. And I think if Tim Davis has joined yet, maybe he could talk a little bit to that, but I don't think he has. But I do think that there's a push to be able to try to do both, right? But in state law, we're bound to a 2-foot head difference, at the end of the year, so we have to manage it for that. So if that was not the case, there could be more flexibility to say, raise it up 5 feet and wet those soils and reestablish the crust or the microbialites. But with state law that way, we have to be cognizant of that and work within those parameters. But I do think that the lake level, we're conscious of recreation, navigation, soils, microbialites, other habitat, even like salting areas for Phragmites control. So there's a lot of benefits to having that lake level up periodically, obviously. So we don't disregard that, but we do have to operate within that law. Sure thing. Any other questions on the salinity committee updates?
Maybe you could refresh us on, it seems to me that the salinity committee no longer sort of makes that decision, that's now in the commissioner's office in terms of the berm control. So what role does the salinity advisory committee play in that? How do you see that now? I know that's evolved.
Yeah, nothing has really changed, to be honest. The commissioner's office, once they were established, they can tell us to do something and they tell us not to do something, but they don't have any regulatory control over the berm. That still resides within our division. And so the salinity committee is still charged with making recommendations to our division. And we have tried historically to follow those as closely as possible and act when the salinity committee makes those recommendations. And that's our intention, is to work through the salinity committee to continue to try to find that, consensus and those paths forward. Okay. So we'll continue to do that unless the commissioner tells us not to do something, at which time we'll have to listen. But so far, he hasn't done anything like that.
Yeah, cool.
So anyway, any other questions? Okay, Marissa, hello.
Hello, everyone.
Marissa just walked in, and I might just have to call on Marissa to come help me out if I start to struggle here. So, all right. So Great Salt Lake Tech team updates. We have a great agenda today of presenters, but one thing that I wanted to get out of the way, and we don't have a ton of time to talk about this, but I did want to start talking about the tech team grants. We always seem like we're trying to start early, and then it takes a little while. Like last year, we had the grant legislation that really hung us up on what we had to do to be able to contract some of those things. This year, I really want to get ahead of it and make sure that we have ample time for folks to get their research proposals in, and then also if they're, looking at staffing or needing to, do anything in preparation for the fiscal year start, when they can start to use that money, that they have plenty of time in advance. So I want to start talking about that today and ask for volunteers to join on a subcommittee where we can have a more in-depth conversation about potential research topics. I do want to look at this a little bit differently, as we've been talking about for the last couple of years. I think it's appropriate now, if we have things that are going to advance management, that we can just directly say, this is what we want to research, and be very targeted in what we're doing, as opposed to opening it up to, other novel ideas or things that maybe don't hit exactly on what we need as managers to advance that. And I don't mean just forestry, fire, and state lands. I'm talking, snowpack, water systems, dust, anything that relates to the Great Salt Lake. We want to have a better understanding of and assist all of our partner agencies and other organizations in their management. So I had one thing that I wanted to bring to the committee that I talked about with Tim Davis, which was really kind of a characterization of return flows from sewer districts and other areas to the Great Salt Lake. I think that's largely not well known. I think we can characterize that better and understand what all those return flows look like, how much of it actually makes it to the lake, how much gets used in the systems, before it makes it to the lake. I think the ones that are on the lake are a little easier to characterize, but as we get further and further away from the lake, it becomes less known. So that was one thing I thought would be useful and interesting, especially as we try to start dedicating water to the lake. We really need to know, what water is available. So that was one area that I thought could be of use, but I would love to open it up if anybody else has any ideas that they'd like to present to the committee today. And we can talk through those. And then also, I would love to start making a list of volunteers for this committee so we can start talking through those research topics. So anyway, any suggestions or thoughts? Yeah, Wayne.
One you kind of alluded to with the microbial lights. Maskin's survey, a hydroacoustic survey, said they're abundant down to over 4178 feet, right? Which is a lot deeper, and that's quite a bit deeper than what Erdley reported in a 1928 or something survey. He gave no methods, so that's a little iffy, but it's also considerably deeper, what I found from scuba surveys, but albeit very limited amounts there. Anyway, so Baskin didn't, he just used hydroacoustics, and there was no, on the ground or on the water verification that they were really that deep. So scuba diving or dredging or what. So we really know how many.
Better understanding the disbursement of the microbial lights.
So I mean, if we went with Baskin's estimate, even at the lowest water, we weren't in bad shape really, depth wise, maybe salinity wise we were. But if Erdley's big difference.
Great. I love that idea. I think that makes a lot of sense to understand, what it is we're trying to protect, knowing that how crucial the microbial lights are for the lake and the ecosystem. Does anybody else have any other topics that we'd like to put on the list for further discussion with the subcommittee? Oh, Wayne, go ahead. Wayne's full of good ideas. I love it. And Wayne, I hope you're going to be on our subcommittee.
Yeah, I can vote for. The other one is for the salt balance, and the advisory committee, USGS and others are looking at how much salts come in the rivers. They're not looking, nobody's looking at how much salt leaves the lake via dust off the playas or aerosols off the whipped up surface of the lake. You look at the oceans, people will characterize how much salt is transported inland from, Pacific Ocean or whatnot. And we're very concerned with how much cadmium, how much mercury, how much blah 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 is reaching the Wasatch Front. Well, I don't think the sodium chloride is getting left behind when we're transporting cadmium. So if we really want to salt balance at the lake, we have to look at what's leaving as well.
It's great suggestion, Wayne. Or great suggestions, Wayne. Any other suggestions or topics anybody would like to?
Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
So I just want to introduce myself. I'm a professor, assistant professor at Department of Biology at Southern Utah University, and I'm a microbial ecologist. And I heard, because it's my second time attend this meeting, so I've heard like I study salinities and also if I understand correct, also microbial survey. So I just want to know if I'm interested in this topic. You said you need someone to be to discuss about, if I understand correctly, is about research ideas. How can I reach you? Because it's probably my second time joining this meeting. Is that possible? You tap your contact information as a message area so I can reach you later after this meeting. We can discuss some details.
Just to make sure I understand the question, you're looking for a contact to be able to discuss potential research topics. Is that correct?
Yes. Also, I heard like, cause today the connection is not very good. As I heard your team did some microbial surveys in the Great Salt Lake area. So I just want to know some details. Maybe later we can talk about that over the email or schedule.
I would love to talk with you offline, and if it's something I can answer, I'll certainly do that. If not, I may know the right researcher.
Yeah. If you can, I can tag my email.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, if you type your email address, then maybe that would be easier, and I'll just reach out to you.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I appreciate you introducing yourself, and welcome to the tech team.
Thank you.
All right. Emily, I see you added on there mapping for Phragmites extent with remote sensing. I think that's also a great suggestion, and something that we are absolutely interested in and looking forward to developing. So that's a great suggestion. Anybody else? Jake?
Yeah, just to go on what Wayne was talking about under the salt balance. As part of this, well, Elliot and I worked on a map.
Beautiful map.
We got some other people too to help with as a conceptual diagram, just to see if we can, pictorially get all of the elements of the salt balance. And so I think that could be we still want to get everyone's input on trying to finalize that and get it as complete as possible. But that could be a good tool to identify which components we have, researched or need to be.
So basically looking at all the moving pieces, and instead of being pictorial, actually quantifying those things so you can put it into a model.
Yeah, that would be the next phase. So some of them have been quantified in the past, some of them need to be improved, some of them are totally unknown. So just trying to make that can help us as a team, be on the same page. See.
Do you think that's ready to go to further to quantify those yet, or is there more analysis that needs to go into the mapping to understand where the inputs and outputs are?
There's a little more. We want to get input from the salinity advisory.
Cool. Okay. And do you think
a better place?
It could be ready in like
we shared it
starting in July?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I think that's a great idea as well. Great.
Anything that helps the water budget of all those wetlands. Right now, for modeling the lake, you can take the outflow from Farmington Bay, the outflow from Bear River Bay, and you're good, because that's the inflow of the Great Salt Lake in those areas. But if the lake rises, it would be good to know what all the aspects of the water budget are in the wetlands upstream. Now, we've had part of that done by Pete Godwin's group, but we need a more holistic view, what all the inflows and outflows are.
And I thought USGS was doing that for their wetland.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's different parts
Needs to be done. You're looking
more broadly. Yeah.
Okay. And then, so anything else before we
Just
move
one
on?
quick add-on to what Wayne's first comment. And I think it was Craig, it was you that told me about the scuba diver who said they saw a spring on the west side of Antelope Island when they were doing some salvage operation.
I don't think that was.
Okay, somebody said they
it
saw
at last meeting.
huge amounts of fresh water coming into this, what they thought was fresh water coming into the sea.
Was that Elliot? Elliot's on there.
I think it was, I can't remember his name, off the top of my head.
But while if we're doing scuba, surveys, doing some hunting around like that, because it's a bit of a wingnut operation, but if you've got somebody out there doing scuba work, check out the west side of Antelope, see if there's evidence of any kind of significant freshwater inputs over there would be useful to tap on.
Also
a
to,
thermal, well, anyway,
to add to another research item, Ben, I don't know if you got that PDF yesterday.
I haven't seen it. If it was sent to me yesterday, I'm a little buried right now.
Kerry Johnson would like to do more chirp research on the surface of nearshore and offshore of the lake. And I think that would add value to understanding salt thickness in the North Arm, but also looking at potential spring areas where the microbialites grow, subaqueous springs, hazards, faults, all that stuff. So she's looking into a new chirp type of system. And that might be a good topic, but we'll have to require boats to do this.
Okay, thanks, Elliot. And I just noted down who had made suggestions, so I assume that if you made a suggestion, you'd be willing to help me craft the formal research questions. So I'll probably be reaching out to you that way. And then anybody who has a thought that you need to, cook that thought a little bit more, feel free to email me, if you think there's something that we should be considering, and we'll make sure to have that discussion when we have a subcommittee. But what I'm still lacking is maybe just a few volunteers to serve on the subcommittee. If I don't get volunteers, I may just reach out and ask folks. So if you don't want to volunteer, I can go that way. It's Wayne and Bill. Appreciate that a lot. But thank you so much.
I could, and do you have rules about like if you submit a proposal that you shouldn't be on the committee, right?
So right now, this would just be crafting the questions. We will look at the ranking committee and
Okay.
so I think right now, just making sure we get good, robust questions. So I think that'd be great, Bonnie.
And I'll also put in a plug for the flies. I think we still have a lot going on that we're missing.
Agreed.
Life science.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. And well, as we start to develop those questions, I might reach out to some of our partners just to see if we can get some, good diverse representation. So anyway, with that, we'll move on the agenda because we have a pretty packed agenda today. And so next on the agenda, we have the migratory shorebird survey from Emily Hamill and Emily Clark as an update to some research was done. Emily's, are you two ready to present?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Well, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Great. Are you all able to see my screen okay?
Yes. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. My name is Emily Clark, or you can call me Em. I am the avian ecologist with Sage Collaborative, and I'll let my colleague introduce themselves.
I'm Emily Hamill. I am the ecologist with National Audubon Society's Saline Lakes program.
Thank you, Emily. So today we're going to give an update on what's been going on with the Intermountain West Shorebird Survey specific to Great Salt Lake, as well as provide some of our regional updates. So to get started, I just want to thank all the partners and funders that have made this work possible. So the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council, Forestry, Fire and State Lands Great Salt Lake Research Grant, Utah Division of Wildlife Resources Grant have made this work happen over the last year, as well as contributions from Sageland Collaborative and National Audubon Society. We also work with all of these additional partners to make this work happen. And across the region, we have over 70 other organizations from 10 other states that we are working with to conduct these surveys. As you all know, many shorebirds make epic migratory journeys, and they take different routes in order to reach their non-breeding grounds. So we are considered along the Pacific Flyway The Intermountain West is the interior portion of the Pacific Flyway, and it contains really critical habitats for stopover sites for many species of shorebirds. And unfortunately, shorebirds are declining to a greater extent than most other avian taxa around the world. In North America alone, about 70% populations have declined over 70% since 1970. So they're facing some really steep declines. And it's really important that we try to figure out what's going on with these birds across the region to see how we can help them. So the Great Salt Lake is one of the most critical stopover sites. The birds are coming here for the abundant resources like the billions of brine flies that emerge annually. They might spend just a few days or weeks during spring and fall migration, but the birds cannot survive without places like the Great Salt Lake. They're essential for stopping and refueling before they complete these really long migratory journeys. So the current Intermountain West Shorebird Survey is replicating a survey effort that was last completed about 30 years ago. Emily was going to tell you a little bit more about this, but from the regional perspective. But the goal for our portion of the survey is to evaluate the migratory shorebird distribution and abundance at Great Salt Lake and across the Intermountain West region, and to provide a management foundation for the shorebird resources. So migration surveys provide this great opportunity to get a snapshot, a population estimate, because all the birds are funneling into these select sites at the same migratory windows. But that's also what makes it difficult, because we need enough people to get out there and reach all these sites during very specific times of the year. So with this project, we can divide our research questions into 3 scales. So first, at the regional level, we're really trying to figure out what sites are shorebirds utilizing and why, and then how does this compare to historical averages? Taking a closer look at the Great Salt Lake ecosystem level, we're also trying to figure out what are the areas that are most important to shorebirds and why. And these are obviously critical decisions because we are charged with making important decisions about which wetlands are getting water, and by providing information to researchers and managers about shorebirds' preferred habitats, we can make sure that water is available during these critical times. And third, we're taking a look at the wetland scale itself. So at Great Salt Lake, we have a few sites where we're doing more specific research, breaking down survey boundaries into management units so that we can understand how their shorebird use correlates to things like Phragmites treatment and management. To give you an update of where we are, the project began excuse me, in fall of 2022, and we have now completed 5 seasons of migration surveys. And we're planning to carry out surveys through at least spring 2026, hopefully with additional funding support. And I wanted to take this opportunity to welcome our newest member of the team, Sharon Montesino, who is on the call today. We are collaborating with the Clark Wolf Lab at Utah State University. So Sharon is going to be undertaking a lot of our data analysis now that we have a few years under our belt. So we're really excited for her to be able to start analyzing this shorebird data in relation to historic numbers, as well as environmental factors like water availability. All right, getting into some of our results. So these are the current survey sites as of fall 2024. We have 6 major survey sites in Utah. These are made up of 70 smaller survey areas. So the Amalga Barren Sanctuary, Blue Lake, Fish Springs National Wildlife Refuge, and Olson Reservoir are all sites made up of just 1 survey area. Utah Lake is 1 survey site made up of 6 survey areas. And the Great Salt Lake ecosystem, which, as you know, is about the size of Rhode Island, this is made up of 60 survey areas. So this is the biggest wetland complex in the entire survey region, and as we'll show you, is extremely valuable for shorebirds. So to be able to conduct such an effort, we have over 100 expert birders, professional biologists, and our community volunteers supporting this project each season. And this provides the public with a great opportunity to conserve their public resources at Great Salt Lake. We do have mandatory training that gives people the chance to learn how to properly conduct a biological survey and follow the protocol. And we provide support with our amazing communications team, has our websites updated with tons of resources, including shorebird identification materials. They also produce incredible newsletters and social media in support of this project. So we have a lot of support from the public as well as our partner biologists to conduct this effort. We also host end of the season social events, so it provides a great opportunity for networking and connection and for people to share their love of Great Salt Lake. So there's a 1-week survey window in the April, so the spring migratory season, as well as 2 weeks across August. However, at Great Salt Lake, we strive to conduct these all on one big day of birding. And this is because the area is so large, we don't want birds to be moving to different sites and get counted doubly. So we conduct one big survey day. Getting into those results in terms of time, I'm only going to be covering the most recent survey from fall 2024, but we have reports from all of the other seasons. So if you're interested in reading those, please just reach out to me and I'll pass them along. I want to point out that the data we're presenting today is just our preliminary numbers. So these are raw counts. These have not yet been adjusted for things like observer bias or survey effort. So please keep that in mind. So our fall 2024 effort was pretty incredible. We had over 500,000 shorebirds counted, and this was from 24 different shorebird species. Our most abundant birds were the red-necked and phalaropes. We combine these groups just because they're often seen from great distances and they can be hard to identify to species. So as a group, we counted over 380,000 phalaropes. This represented 73% of the total count. The next most abundant species was American avocet, with over 80,000 birds counted, representing about 16% of the count. And I want to point out that the majority of these birds, so about 78%, were counted on lands managed by Forestry, Fire, and State lands. So let's take a look at the distribution and abundance through some of our maps that we made to give you the key. The yellow areas represent the highest abundances, so the greatest concentrations of birds were in those locations, moving from the orange and ending in the darker blue and purple are the least abundant areas, and areas with that white, off-white color where 0 birds were concentrated. So we had the greatest abundances at Farmington Bay North, which is this survey area, as well as around Carrington Island. And these are all managed by Forestry, Fire, and State lands. Taking a look at our American avocets, again, the yellow represents the areas of the highest concentration. So we were seeing that most of these birds were concentrated at Ogden Bay, as well as Bear River Bay. Again, both managed by Forestry, Fire, and State lands, as well as we had a lot of birds observed on Antelope Island West, which is managed by Utah State Parks. This shows our distribution abundance of the Wilsons and redneck phalaropes. They are highly concentrated around the area of Carrington Island. And then we also see birds at the Utah Training and Test Range, Lakeside Valley, and again around the Farmington Bay North area. So in addition to the shorebird survey counts for our purposes, we're also collecting really valuable data about Utah species of greatest conservation need. We decided to add the white-faced ibis to our surveys in spring 2024. Many of you might know that this is not a shorebird. This is actually a wading bird. However, because it's a large, distinct bird, it was not much effort to add them to our ongoing survey protocol. So we were taking advantage of this amazing effort and all these people going out collecting data to make sure that we're able to help provide information about Utah species of greatest conservation need. We are also monitoring for snowy plover, another species of conservation need. And they're kind of the opposite in that they are a small, tiny, cryptic shorebird that are very difficult to find. And so we have specially trained observers going out to areas where we expect to find these birds to make sure that we are counting as many as we can. And Great Salt Lake provides essential migratory as well as breeding habitat for both of these species. So taking a look at their distribution and abundance, we can see on the left side that the white-faced ibis has similar distributions in terms of highly concentrated at Farmington Bay North, as well as Bear River Bay. These birds prefer marshy habitats for foraging on things like crustaceans and other invertebrates. And then it's important to point out they don't show up as much in the total count maps, but the habitats for snowy plovers are quite different. And we can see that they were concentrated down here on the southern portion of the lake. This is because they prefer these open, expansive playa habitats. They are ground nesters and forage mainly on small invertebrates. So these areas were the Stansbury Mudflat north and south, as well as Black Rock and Six Mile Creek, all of which are also lands managed by Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. And of note, we had our highest count of snowy plovers this past season with over 1,400 individuals counted. So how does the Great Salt Lake compare to the rest of the region? So in this table, I was able to pull out counts just at Great Salt Lake, so omitting the rest of the Utah survey areas. So going from the left to the right, you can see which survey it was, the number of surveys that were done across the region, the survey sites, what the count was excluding Great Salt Lake, then what the count was just at Great Salt Lake, and the total Intermountain West count. And what I really want to draw your attention to is these percentages here that are bolded. These represent the portion of birds counted at Great Salt Lake compared to the entire Intermountain West region. And you can see it's pretty incredible. In fall 2024, we had 64.5% of all the birds counted across the Intermountain West were counted at Great Salt Lake. And this holds true through the other surveys with very high numbers. Even in spring 2024, which was our lowest count of shorebirds, we still had over 20% of the birds counted, which equates to roughly a fifth of the whole region, which is still a monumental number. So the health of Great Salt Lake is essential for these shorebirds. Now I'm going to pass it over to Emily, who will take a deeper dive into the regional data.
Thanks so much. And as Em mentioned, the survey is a region-wide effort across the Intermountain West. So I'm just going to quickly go over some of our recent results across the region. We go to the next slide. So the surveys we've been conducting in recent years are a replication of a similar shorebird survey effort conducted between 1998 and 1995. Those surveys encompassed 162 sites, which are represented as blue dots on the map on the right. In the last 2 years of surveys, we've been able to grow this effort to include 214 sites, with new sites represented as orange squares, as you can see there. The original survey effort also cited 900,000 birds as the maximum total count in a fall migration survey window over the 6-year survey period, which is about 100,000 birds higher than the survey's fall migration maximum total of 800,000 birds across the region, where it's also significant to note that 52 more sites were surveyed in 2024 than during the late 80s, early to mid 90s survey. Go to the next slide, sorry. One of the abundance metrics discussed in the original publication was sites that held over 1,000 birds during a single survey. 38 sites were recorded as such. However, 19 of those no longer host that capacity of birds, and those sites are represented on the map as gray triangles. Currently, we've recorded 34 sites that hold over 1,000 birds, 19 of which remain from those important sites noted in the original surveys, and those are the blue triangles on the map. And while 15 sites are new additions to this metric in the recent survey, either because they were sites added this time around or because they're sites of new importance due to changes in habitat. And you can see those sites denoted as orange circles on the map. We can go to the next slide. So when it comes time to analyze the results in a way that draws comparisons between the original survey and the recent survey effort, we'll be putting the analysis, in the context of the drastic changes to surface water that have occurred in the space of the 33 years that have lapsed since shorebirds were first counted at this regional scale. And I just wanted to use, this slide to create a visual for that distinction between when the original surveys occurred and what the landscape looks like now. Go to the next slide, please. Now I'm just going to jump into some recent results from the last 3 fall migration surveys across the region. This map shows results from our first survey in fall of 2022 during extreme drought conditions, where our maximum count was about 200,000 birds at Great Salt Lake. You can go to 2023. Moving on to the next year, where you can see our capacity region-wide had grown a significant amount, and we counted a surprising 250,000 birds at the Salton Sea in Southern California, which is comparable to the close to 300,000 birds at Great Salt Lake that were counted during that same window. So that's pretty significant observation. Can go to the next. And finally, our most recent survey in fall of 2024. As I mentioned, our capacity has really grown tremendously over the past 5 seasons of these surveys. And we really owe that to our dedicated volunteers who return year to year, and our strong partnerships with volunteer groups, state wildlife agencies, and federal wildlife professionals across the expansive 11-state region. And you can go to the next slide. And so here we've put together our region-wide totals from the last 5 seasons and how they compare to the median total counts from 1989 to 1995. As you can see, our recent fall counts are only about 200,000 individuals greater than the historic median, while recent spring migration counts are about 100,000 less than the historic median. And as I mentioned previously, some of the proposed analyses of the data will look into the drivers of this change, be it habitat quality, migration timing, et cetera. Can go to the next slide, please. And then, to break the results down to the species level at Great Salt Lake, we also see larger ranges in total counts due to the longer data collection period of the historic surveys, but also higher maximum counts and medians in years past than in recent surveys. And this is true for the comparison, of the majority of species except for phalaropes. At the moment, our team has been attributing the higher counts of phalaropes in recent years to differing survey windows that capture a better look at this group's migration and possibly enhanced survey methodology than what was used in the historic surveys. So that's something of note for sure. You can go to the next slide, please. And this last table is just a look at some of our important saline lake sites across the region. Of course, Great Salt Lake is the site with the largest surface area and carrying capacity, so it hosts the lion's share of shorebirds. But these other smaller terminal systems are facing similar challenges when it comes to climate change and water availability. So, it's important to highlight these other sites while considering the management implications of this data and, what this data could help to inform across the Intermountain West. And it's also interesting to see how the numbers across the region have really bounced back following the lows during the fall of 2022 mega drought, and how bird abundance has changed at these sites across the West as more water has become available in the system. So I will pass it back to Em to talk about where we're going from here.
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, so this list just provides you with an overview of what we're hoping to accomplish over the next few years. We will be conducting at least 3 more migration surveys, but we'll be looking for funding to continue these further. We'll be refining our count estimates and have the robust regional comparisons. We'll be comparing this data to environmental metrics and using tools like the one Emily just showed you, the WEP tool, to provide evaluation of surface water availability over time. And we're also especially interested in connecting this study to other research going on at Great Salt Lake. So we are comparing this work to shorebird distribution to Phragmites mapping would be of huge interest to us. We are considering the different management treatments that have occurred at some of our smaller wetland delineations and being able to track the effectiveness. We're looking forward to trying to connect this work to future brine fly research. And we hope that ultimately these data are going to inform and prioritize wetland management, both locally and regionally. Very much for your time, and hopefully we have a couple of minutes for questions, but if not, our contact information is there, and please feel free to reach out.
Thank you, Emily and Emily. And I would suggest also, if you think that there may be some opportunity to continue your studies, that you can send me some research ideas and how that relates to the management of these wetlands. I love the idea of correlating, past studies and integrating that in to see how we can better manage those wetlands, especially since a lot of that's on Forestry Fire and State Lands land. So thank you again. Does anybody have any questions? We have maybe a couple minutes for questions.
Yeah, just a question or comment. It looked like, I couldn't read the legend for sure, but it looked like all the numbers you were presented were total numbers in Farmington Bay or total numbers. And that's really useful data, but another metric would be number of birds per kilometer of shoreline. So you could see, well, is Farmington Bay really better per unit than Bear River Bay or something? So that'd be a good way, really helpful to understand what type of habitat quality was best or worse. Probably differ a lot by different bird types, different species.
Yes, thank you so much. We were planning to do that in our analysis portion. Again, today was just the raw counts, but yeah, we're absolutely going to be comparing those and taking a look at the survey areas compared to shorebird abundance and distribution.
Wow. Profoundly insightful, and clearly it confirms the responsibility that we have, the value that Great Salt Lake provides, and that ongoing preservation and protection of the habitat. So thank you. Good job.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you. So with that, we will move on to Bill Johnson and Kip Solomon to report on their Great Salt Lake Water study.
Thanks. So I gotta share my screen.
Is there a way to make it so that the screen's bigger and maybe we don't see the other participants? So
yeah, we can. Jen, do you mind when he gets that shared to change our layout?
So it doesn't say share. I don't know, James. I can present now.
Yep, you present now. And then you can either
Maybe dimming the lights might help some in that respect too. I don't know.
see what happens. Let's see what happens if we turn off the switches here.
Is it possible to turn the heat on?
Is that a no? This is the state. We're on a budget. Is that okay for those in the back to have that?
Okay, so why is it projecting? I think it's projecting what I'm seeing.
I think you have to present your entire screen to do that because it looks like you just. And if you do entire screen, it'll show what you're seeing. Also, don't pull up any of your.
There we go.
Yeah, yeah.
The one is closed.
Good job.
Okay. Great, thank you. So I have a laser pointer and that's outdated. I haven't caught up yet.
Also get the high on that thing down below, so the coverage.
Yeah.
Hey.
Okay, so this is actually two projects that were funded about a year and a half ago during the Forestry Fire State Lands solicitation. And so I'm going to talk for a bit, but two students who were working on this project are in the back. They'll come up front and say their parts here in just a bit. And so those are Evan Alamaco-Mensah and Sam Carter, working with me and Kip Solomon at the university. But this is a multi-agency effort. It follows the Utah Geological Survey, Hugh Herlo, Elliot Jagnicki, Aaron Brinkman, and are involved from there. And then USGS involves Scott Heenick and Melissa Masbrook, David O'Leary. So, so this is not really ready for prime time. We've been working on this for a year and a half, but there's been a lot of field work, trying to set up infrastructure, trying to get data, and we're still in the midst of that, but I'll share with you what we have. There's a follow-on project from Tim Davis that is also carrying this project forward. So this is got a mixture of both funding streams, and I'll explain more about that just a bit. So there are two projects involved here to look at groundwater inflow to Great Salt Lake. One we call the Uplands Project that extends up into the mountain block to understand the role of mountain block storage of groundwater in the system. Then the other one is called the Playa Project. And I'm going to focus on the Playa Project. There's a full PowerPoint on this Uplands Project that I've summarized in this one slide. And basically what it comes down to is when you look at the age of the water in these different streams coming into the system from the east, the age of that water is determined from tritium concentrations as well as from noble gas relative concentrations. You can see that the water tends to be different during base flow, which is when there hasn't been significant precipitation for a while. So what's in the streams is actually what's coming from groundwater feeding the streams, and versus snowmelt, which is directly from the snowpack, and so is going more directly to the stream. And what you see is the base flows tend to be a decade or more old. So 17 years old, according to these environmental tracers for South Fork, the Ogden River, and so on and so forth down through these different streams. And you can see a younger signature during snowmelt, but still not days, not months, but years. And so you can see this influence of the time that the water spends underground before it gets to the stream. And the reason that's so important is that the way water managers consider the water budget, they need to reflect the fact that there is this lag in the system, storage in the system. And so Paul Brooks is heavily involved in that, making water managers aware of that lag. So that's a big part of this project. The other thing I note here on the left is that they're looking at gravity. And I can't tell you much about relative gravity, but the point is that they can see storage of water in the system through gravity measurements. And so they've established a system of 22 stations in the Salt Lake Valley that are designed to track the changes of water storage in the system across interannual periods, across multiple years. And so you'll be seeing more data from that down the road. So what I want to focus on is this Playa project, where our goal was to put in infrastructure, piezometers around Farmington Bay to understand what the groundwater system looked like, because no one really had a sense of what this interface between the fresh water coming from the mountain block and the salt water, the hypersaline water at the lake, where that interface actually sits. And so we put these piezometer nests of multiple depths in these various locations shown in these green pins, and also including one down here at Burmester in the South Shore. And what that looks like in terms of the well depths is shown here. We have piezometers ranging from 108 feet at the deepest to as shallow as 5 feet. And it's a lot of work to go and read the water levels in these sites and go sample them. So we've got pressure transducers, as denoted in the green ones, to log on an hour frequency the water levels. And so that infrastructure now exists. It continues to grow a bit, as I'll explain later. And all these are registered under Hugh Hurlow with the state engineer's office. So they're all permitted. In addition to this, we got cores from several of these sites, sediment cores, to understand how the sediment characteristics change with depth through these depths. And so what they look like on the surface are these piezometer pads. And so you see them dotting around different areas of Farmington Bay. When we look at these sediment cores, Scott Henoch of USGS was able to provide us with some useful samplers that are suction samplers that we could insert directly into the sediment, pull out the pore water, and measure the conductance, specific conductivity of these as a proxy for salinity. And what we see is that as we move west from near the mountain or near the bench, A1C1 is up on the Antelope Island Causeway here, near the booth. And then moving west from that to AIC3 and then AIC4, the salinity increases. And the salinity, or specific conductivity, is showing as a lens at the top of the system, extending down to about 20 to 30 feet. Below that, it's all fresh water. And we did not expect that. We expected salt water underneath Farmington Bay. But we've got fresh water under the entirety of Farmington Bay. And the South Shore shows a similar thing. So ST 0.3 is actually South Farmington Bay, but that's there for a comparison to Burmester on the South Shore by the marina, or the vicinity of the marina. And that also has a salt lens with fresh water below it, but thicker. And it's likely that the thicknesses of these lenses reflects the relative fluxes of groundwater upward or lakeward in the system. So we're going to be backing out those fluxes through this project. So if we just plot these specific conductances as a function of location across the causeway, the 15-foot deep wells show a nice trend where it gets saltier and hypersaline as you move west. And the deep wells show the same thing, but they're all in the range of fresh water. Okay, so the salt on the surface is coming from periodic incursion of the lake into the system, leaving behind that signature, possibly a contribution from evapotranspiration occurring at the surface as well. But the shape of these lenses is dictated by the flux of the groundwater through the system. And so Evan is going to talk more about getting at these fluxes. So Evan, you want to come up here, and I'll try to follow what you're saying with this cursor rather than you having to use a laser pointer. You can use the laser pointer if you want, but I could use the cursor here, and you tell me if I'm pointing at the wrong thing.
I think I'm
Yeah,
gonna
you
do
can. They won't be able to see online, so I'm going to still do the cursor.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Bill. What we have here, it's hydraulic head plots. And then I just want to walk you through what's happening on the slide. So laser.
I don't work on TVs, unfortunately.
Oh, it's not going to work.
Okay, I'll follow it.
All right. So we have the dashed blue lines, which is showing hydraulic heads at AIC1, which is our easternmost site. And then the dashed green lines are AIC3 intermediate site. And then the dashed red lines are AIC4 westernmost site. What is happening here is that we have higher hydraulic heads in our deeper wells. So you can see up there, AIC1-100 has a higher head compared to AIC1-50 which is higher than AIC 1-15, which is also higher than AIC 1-5. And then this is consistent with all sites. Another thing that's happening here is at AIC 4, we can see that at our intermediate depth of 25 feet, the hydraulic head is slowly equilibrating. And that's because of the low permeability of the layers. The top panel shows lateral gradients in our 5 feet well, and then the panel below its lateral gradient in our 15 feet well. In both wells, in both plots, negative values shows a westward flow, and then positive values show an eastward flow. What is interesting here is we can see a spatial trend seasonally. So we can see that during the dry periods, flow is westward. And then westward happening in the panel below, the same thing happening in the panel above. The interesting thing here is that flow towards the west is steep at the east. So from AIC 1 to AIC 3, we have very steep flow, and then it becomes shallow towards the west from AIC 3 to AIC 4. And then during the wet periods, flow becomes eastward, so positive values. And then this happens as Farmington Bay Channel fills up from runoff water. Vertical hydraulic gradients, plot showing here at the top panel is shallow vertical gradients. The panel below is deep vertical gradients. In both plots, negative values shows upward flow. And then what's happening here in the top panel is AIC 4-15 in red to AIC 4-5 has a strong vertical gradient. But when we want to compare this shallow vertical gradient to our deep vertical gradient seen in AIC 1-100 in blue, we can see that that is way much stronger compared to AIC 4-15 to AIC 4-5. So going back to the panel below, we can see that from AIC 4-50 to AIC 4-15 has the strongest upward gradient. So the main takeaway here is that we have strong upward gradients in our deeper wells compared to the shallow wells.
And
then
westernmost sides.
At the westernmost side. And then what's happening here is that if you want to compare the vertical gradient to the lateral gradients, our vertical gradient is way higher, I think 3 orders of magnitude higher than the lateral gradient. So you can see from the red line over there in the top panel. In order to be able to quantify the flow in terms of fluxes, we have to get hydraulic conductivity values. So several slab tests were done in all wells at different sites. And then the interesting results is that we can see we had very low hydraulic conductivity values. And then most of the values are within the silt to clay transition. Our low K values seen at AIC 4 are typical of marine clay sediments. The interesting thing here is that we can see a spatial trend where hydraulic conductivity decreases as we move from east to west. So from AIC 1 in blue, there's a decrease towards the west, meaning that AIC 1 has way more permeable layers compared to AIC 4. What I have here is column test results on the right, and then stratigraphic column on the left, on the right. So what happened was, this is not a very good image. I had to do a sketch last minute, so please bear with me. What I want to point out here is these lab column tests were done on 2-inch core sediments, which was mostly taken 5 feet apart. That is from sediment cores that we got during installation of our wells. What I want to show here is our very high hydraulic conductivity values matching corresponds to our sand, and then silt layers. And then the very low hydraulic conductivity values corresponds to sticky clay layers. The interesting thing is, if you want to compare our vertical hydraulic conductivity with our lateral hydraulic conductivity, the vertical hydraulic conductivity is way smaller, 2 orders of magnitude lower compared to the lateral hydraulic conductivity. So using the gradient hydraulic conductivity to calculate the flux, the vertical and the lateral groundwater flux using Darcy's law. So what I want to point out here is, in terms of the K, the hydraulic conductivity, we have very high lateral K, effective K, but then we have very low lateral flow. And then when it comes to the vertical K, that is smaller, but then we have a very large upward gradient, as I mentioned. So putting that together to give us a flux, we can see that the lateral flux is minimal when compared to the vertical flux. And then when compared this with evapotranspiration, you can see that most of the vertical flux is eventually going directly to ET. So though we have much upward flux along the playa margins, most of this upward flux goes directly to ET. Okay, so I'll call my colleagues.
I'll butt in here for just a sec.
Okay.
All right, Sam, thanks. So we performed environmental tracer analyses on samples from these piezometers that Evan and Sam sampled together after preparing them. And what these environmental tracers do, as I mentioned earlier, is they date the water. And so what you can see in terms of age is that the shallow waters tend to be a few to several decades in age. And they, the signature from the noble gases say that they recharged when they were salty. So this could reflect incursion by the lake or a mixture of precipitation and incursion by the lake. But they're relatively young compared to these deeper waters that are greater than 85 years old and probably more like centuries old. Okay, centuries to millennia. So that's consistent with this notion that in the playa, we have a stronger lateral gradient, stronger vertical gradient as that lateral gradient converts over to this vertical gradient. And so these waters get older as you go deeper because they're coming in from the mountain block over these much longer flats. And then Sam Carter is going to talk about an expanded analysis that gives us more insight to the system. So Sam, just tell me when to advance.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, so I'm going to dive in a little bit more to the environmental tracer side of things, and specifically kind of what's happening, quote unquote, upstream of Great Salt Lake. And that's important because it kind of puts this Great Salt Lake work in context, right? It's hard to know what's happening downstream if you don't have some sort of frame of reference. And so we've done a series of analyses to understand the age and the origin, most of understanding how much actually makes it to the lake. Right here are some kind of preliminary data showing ages of groundwater. So when I say groundwater age, I'm referring to the time that that water has been in the subsurface for, right? So that FV1 site, presumably water fell as precipitation, rain or snow 55 years ago, infiltrated the ground, has been flowing in the subsurface ever since. And at that point of sample, it was 55 years old. And so what you'll see immediately is that we already have kind of an age gradient that emerges right on the far left side of the screen, this FB3 site, which is the Antelope Island Visitor Center well. Really old water, could be thousands of years old. In the center of the screen, kind of on the playa margins, water that's old, over 85 years old, older than we can date with this technique, but not thousands of years old. And then to the right, these are some municipal wells from Layton and Clearfield, and you see more modern water. And so we have this age gradient, right, where groundwater is getting older the further away from the mountains and the closer to Great Salt Lake, which makes sense with our conceptual understanding of things. And so we're going to need a lot more data points to make this more robust. But if as an example for this preliminary data, if you were to calculate a velocity from this, which you can do with an age gradient, you would get about 66 meters per year. Yeah. So, and understanding the origin of this groundwater, noble gas data, xenon, krypton, argon, neon, and helium are used to understand the recharge elevation. So that's the elevation band at that groundwater, or that water infiltrated into the ground and hit the water table at. And you can see overwhelmingly, for our purposes, Great Salt Lake is 4,200 feet. Wasatch Mountains range from about 5,000 to 10,000. And you can see overwhelmingly that all of these deeper wells appear to have come from the mountain block, which again makes sense in our conceptual understanding of things, but it obviously gets more complicated when we zoom into to our wells. So you've seen this AIC3 salinity profile. Bill and Eben have both talked about, the saltwater lens at the surface, freshening with depth. Oxygen 18 profile on your right. So that's oxygen 18 versus depth. And this kind of tells us about the evaporative history of that water, right? So you can see that, again, at depth where it's fresh, it's very representative of what we would see falling as rain or snow up in the mountain block. And then in the shallow subsurface, we see values that look highly evaporated. So it's very clear that that water has come from Great Salt Lake. Yeah, next one. This is a Piper diagram for those who are not familiar with it. It's just a way that geochemists can try to understand different water types in hopes of understanding the origin. One more time, Bill. And so, you'll see our municipal wells, those are our valley wells, right? The Layton, Clearfield, and all that stuff. That's representative of our mountain block water. It's a calcium bicarbonate type, which makes sense given the geology of the Wasatch. Our shallow AIC wells are also, not surprisingly, this sodium chloride water, right? Salt water makes sense. One thing that we still don't really know, we're still trying to figure out, is these deep AIC wells don't appear to be a perfect linear mixture between the two. And so there must be some sort of chemical evolution of that water as it's traveling towards the lake, but we're not really sure what's happening there yet. So kind of the preliminary conclusions from the environmental tracers are, one, there are huge fluxes of groundwater moving towards Great Salt Lake, and that groundwater has to go somewhere, right? If it's coming from someplace and it's moving at a certain speed, it has to go somewhere. So still trying to figure out where exactly that's going. But yeah, two, we have a significant volume of fresh groundwater underneath Farmington Bay. More, Bill. And all of that water underneath from our deep wells and from the municipal wells and Antelope Island well suggests that it came from the mountain block, right? Recharged while fresh, high elevation, and it has an old age. And then the shallow wells all suggest it, came from Great Salt Lake. It has a low recharge elevation, probably equilibrated with the atmosphere last when it was salty, and has a relatively young age. So we kind of have this, dichotomy of these two different fluxes, and we're still trying to figure that out. And then lastly, we haven't really figured out, via the environmental tracers at least, we haven't really found any major discrete discharge areas. But I think it's pretty promising that the tracers can illuminate, some spatial trends in groundwater flow. Specifically, if we have a huge gap in age along the ply margins, that can indicate that maybe a lot of this groundwater is discharging on the ply margins, as opposed to going directly into Farmington Bay. And we know some of that at least translates from that horizontal flux from the mountain block to a vertical flux, like Bill was talking about. And then it's also possible that some of this groundwater is undercutting all of our wells and hitting the Antelope Island Fault and discharging their springs. We've sampled that. We don't have the data back yet, so you'll have to stay tuned till my thesis is done in spring to figure that out. Oh, yeah.
And
that's the story. Yeah.
So the project, as we continue to collect this data, we're also bringing in geophysics. Mike Thorne, who's a geophysicist in the Department of Geology, Geophysics at U, has been doing these electrical resistivity lines. And so he did this along the causeway to show that he could pick up through electrical resistivity the salty layer at the top, shown in red, going to fresh water at depth, shown in the blue. And so we can get a two-dimensional representation that's ground truth with these piezometers. And so because we can do that, we wanted to start to understand if we have this discharge, going to the playa and or the lake, how discrete, are there discrete zones as well as diffuse zones of discharge? And when you look from Google Earth at Farmington Bay, you see these curious circular features, and people on the project have been talking about this for a year now. But they're very prominent, and we named these two in Farmington Bay brown spots 9 and 10. It's not got the ring of a, you know, what were those bird names? A marbled falcon. And so you see these everywhere on the playa, but this is east of Fremont Island. And so we wanted to get a sense of what these things were. Were they just biological, you know, islands of Phragmites, or are they hydrologically?
We just saw a bunch of them out at Black Rock.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, we visited one. This is round spot number 9 up close. It's about a 3-mile bike ride from the Shorelands Preserve. And we did a little Phragmites eradication to look into the center of it. And we sampled, we put piezometers into this, shallow piezometers at 7 and 11 feet to see if the water chemistry looked any different. And indeed, the center wells are freshwater, and the perimeter wells are hypersaline. So these are little pipes of water coming into the system. And so then, thankfully, permitted us to go and take a track-mounted geoprobe out there. And I was a little frightened that we might lose this thing, but we went fine. And so we put in deeper wells at 30 and 60 feet, as well as did a geophysical line across this feature. And what that shows us is that these wells, all the way from 60 feet deep to just 7 feet deep, are all fresh in the center. But then on the perimeter of this thing, the shallow wells are salty and the deeper wells are fresh. And this matches perfectly the geophysical line, where you can see this fresh water coming up like a little chimney from depth, penetrating through the salty layer. It's likely permeability that controls all this. So Evan's going to be running permeability tests on the core that we took for this thing to understand how it differs from permeability in other places we measure. But what this brings to mind is that a potential relationship between these kinds of features and dust hotspots, where the dust hotspots might reasonably be predicted to occur where the salt lens is thicker and you don't have the upward flux of fresh water feeding the system. So we'd like to do more work to understand that relationship. And one good way to do that is to perform an airborne survey. So I've pinged Tim Davis, that a geophysicist in our department who writes the book on these types of surveys, has contacted a helicopter-based group. They're all based in Canada because they're doing mineral surveys, but they can do this on the lake. And we run around 100K to do a pilot survey where those flight lines are shown at Farmington Bay, and they go right over some of these circular features, but they also go across the channel and over to Antelope Island. And this would teach us a lot about how that saltwater interface varies with across this area. So we'll see whether or not we can make this happen, but that's the next step in this whole thing.
Is that just surface data, or is it?
No, it penetrates just like this does. In fact, this would, so that on-ground survey penetrated to approximately 80 meters. The helicopter-based survey would go down, if I remember correctly, to a couple hundred meters. Okay. It is possible that there's fresh water even under the lake. I'd be really surprised by this, so we could pick that up if we could do these surveys. So be interesting to find out.
These little holes seem to move, Bill.
They seem to move. Interesting. Yeah.
So where they're coming up, maybe based on pressure of the lake bed, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think it's permeability, and I could see the possibility that they might move depending on how much hydraulic pressure there is. So, and it's getting ugly out there. We're still trying to get pressure transducers in, hopefully this Friday. Yeah.
Thanks. Well, thank you, Bill and Kip, and your students for the input. Does anybody have any questions? We have a couple minutes. Okay.
Historically, and I guess even today, there are a lot of geothermal springs along the base of the Wasatch. Did your studies find anything in the geothermal nature? Does the chemistry composition of that any different?
You know, this study isn't looking at that because those are obviously deeper waters coming in, and we're interested in kind of the freshwater component. So I gotta say, I'm ignorant of the water chemistry coming through the thermal springs.
Scott Henick did a study that was looking at primarily looking at lithium recharge and did some chemistry analysis on the geothermal waters. So it might get at a little bit of that, but yeah, there might be some connections there.
Yeah, I wish I could tell you something about that, but I don't know the relationship. It's a good question. Sure.
Any other questions? I was curious, and forgive my ignorance on this, I was trying to absorb all this, but it's really complicated stuff. But with the age of the water and the lag time between what we get from the mountains versus the streams and the infiltration, when we see that in the lake, do you think you'll be able to characterize the lag time and groundwater discharge, or any fluxes and how much groundwater we're seeing discharge to the lake through these piezometers, so we can get a better idea of like modeling inputs to the lake?
That's the hope. And so, Sam's refining the analyses for the ages and the recharge elevations. But once that's done, the idea is to be able to now generalize regarding the fluxes to flows, right? To do that, you have to assume how large a cross-sectional area that flux is occurring across. And these 2D surveys or airborne surveys will actually help a lot there, because we can understand whether things look the same as we move around or not, or whether
apply the same.
Right, because right now we don't know that high flux that Sam was able to pick up between those two municipal wells. Is that those wells may be there for a reason? That may be a particularly high flow pathway, right? And so we need to understand, is that the case, or is it all the way across that eastern flank do we see big flow?
And then just as a follow-up, I know that on sovereign lands, we had done a long-term permit with UGS, but is there funding and a mechanism to make sure these are maintained and monitored into the future, so we can continue to collect data on these?
Right, you're asking me that?
Yeah.
Or should I be
UGS,
asking
does
you that?
UGS have the go to keep these things monitored?
We haven't got down to brass tacks on that, but Hugh owns them.
Yeah.
And he's fully invested in this as much as us, because we're both buying transducers to put in these things and monitor. So I would assume they're committed and able to keep this going in the future, but I don't know.
I think it'd be great to make sure that we're continuing to monitor, because I think to characterize the discharges and the quantities even over time and make those relationships, it's going to be crucial to do that. We need to look at expanding the amount of piezometers to characterize other gradients and soils. It'd be really neat to
yeah, one thing we should be thinking about is some really neat ones to understand what's going on.
We should talk.
Elliot Chadnick, he has his hand raised, but you can't see it on
there. Oh, Elliot, go ahead.
I'm just curious if the age dates of the waters could be related back to the rock glaciers up in the Wasatch, and is that the source long term supplying water?
You guys are asking some tough questions. Sam, do you have any insight on that?
That's possible. I'm not sure that age data would necessarily constrain that more than snow melt.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Sam. And the thing that happens is that everything gets mixed together once it gets into the subsurface. It's called chemostasis, right? The chemical signature is pretty constant despite big changes in infiltration and discharge.
Okay. All right.
So how involved are you with the USGS groundwater model?
No, not at all. But this network can certainly provide calibration testing.
I know you voiced some concerns a while ago, and it'd be nice if somehow that there was some collaboration between your groups.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So on the age dating with the tracers, it sounds like you just assume, well, it's 85 years old or 100, let's say 100 years old, but is that possibly a mix of 0 years old water and 200-year-old water?
You know, for the greater than 85, it's pretty unlikely because, you know, where would that young water have come from? Right? And so, and Sam, feel free to jump in here, but
Yeah, I would say that older than 85, if it's completely tritium dead, then it's like, there's probably not a mixture of any young water because there's none of that young tracer, but the ones that are 25 years old, 75, those are almost certainly a mixture of some sort. So yeah, absolutely.
We are getting close to the end here. So Jeff, I know you have your hand raised. Do you want to ask a quick question?
I was wondering, does the geophysical work that they're doing, does that help identify where the shallow water table is? I guess.
Shallow water table, the surface of the shallow water table?
Trying to.
Yeah, it can. Yeah, that's a very good question, Jeff. We haven't tried to extract that. But that's not hard to get because it's so darn close to the surface. And so, in fact, it's at the surface right now. And so, but I suspect that yes, the tricky thing about electrical resistivity and related methods is that if the rock's changing, if the sediment's changing, that also imparts a signal, right? The fortunate thing we have here is that Armstrong Bay is really kind of monotonous lithologically. And so we can really see that salt fresh interface configuration. But the upper interface, the air-water interface, I don't know. I have to ask.
I think that capillary action that links to the evaporative loss is linked to the salt crust formation. And areas where I've seen where there is no crust, it's usually dry, and I don't typically have a shovel to see how deep the water is. But I think that, I don't know, it's just interesting.
No, great. All right, guys, I think we got to move on. We're really at the end of our time here. So if anybody have any, and then maybe just a reminder for our researchers, if you are concluding your research and haven't submitted a report to Forestry so we can put those on our website, please do that. Otherwise, we'll be reaching out and asking for those eventually. So thanks again for presenting today. Are there any public comments for the tech team? Good. Any member updates, anything else any of the members would like to discuss? The tech team research grants will be certainly a method or a topic of discussion with the subcommittee, and I'll reach out to folks to schedule that time and find a time that's suiting for everybody, maybe after the holidays. With that coming, or if I can get it together maybe before. But appreciate everybody coming today. Our next meeting is on February 11th, at which time hopefully our subcommittee will have met and we can come back with a list of what we're hoping to ask, and perhaps even have that RFP ready to go. So anyway, thanks for coming today, and meeting adjourned. Thank you.